Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip quietly into the side streets of the Middle Ages, where people tried to figure out love, sex, and privacy in a world without hotel keycards or neon vacancy signs. Imagine yourself standing under a crooked lantern, the kind that throws more shadow than light, and someone's whispering about where couples met when their homes had no walls thicker than a slice of bread. You're about to find out. And trust me, you probably wouldn't survive a week in their world. No air conditioning, no deodorant, no locks on your door. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And go ahead. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. There's something soothing about knowing people across the world are all half asleep together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background. Hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in the heart of a medieval town. The streets are narrow, pressed in by timber houses that lean like gossiping neighbors, spilling shadows into every corner. The air smells faintly of wood smoke, baked bread, and the not-so-gentle reminder that sanitation wasn't a strong point in this era. As you walk, you hear voices, laughter from the tavern, a lute playing somewhere above, and if you listen carefully, the hushed rustle of lovers, looking for a moment of privacy where everyone lives on top of each other. Privacy, in fact, was the great luxury of the Middle Ages. You can buy fancy silk, you can bribe a guard, but to be alone with someone, that was priceless. Homes were often one-room huts, with family, animals, and sometimes guests all crowded together. You tried to imagine it. You, your parents, your siblings, 2 goats, and a visiting uncle all sleeping in the same space. Suddenly, the idea of sneaking off to a dark corner of the marketplace doesn't seem so scandalous. It seems like survival. And this is where courtyards and corners come in. These spaces, tucked between taverns, behind stables, or under the half-collapsed arch of a city wall, became the unofficial dating spots of medieval life. You can almost see the scene. A baker's apprentice slipping out after sweeping flour from his hands, waiting nervously under a fig tree. A merchant's daughter pretending to fetch water, but her pail never gets filled. Every society finds its loopholes, and in the Middle Ages, love was a master of improvisation. Of course, not everyone approved. Church sermons thundered against fornication, but historians still debate just how seriously everyday people took those warnings. Some argue that village life was shockingly conservative, others that people were far more practical than pious. The truth likely lives in the grey space between, where temptation met obligation and rules bent quietly behind the curtains of the night. And oh, the gossip. Medieval towns thrived on it. If you slipped into a corner too often, the neighbors noticed. Privacy wasn't just hard to come by. It was constantly threatened by curious eyes. Think of it as the medieval version of social media. One wrong move, and the whole village knew. Only, instead of tweets, it was the alewife whispering over her mugs, or the parish clerk writing notes he wasn't supposed to. Still, love persisted. Desire, after all, doesn't wait for perfect architecture. Courtyards filled with shadows became sanctuaries, and lovers learned the art of timing. Festivals and markets gave cover, the noise and bustle allowing 2 hands to brush without anyone noticing. A fig here, a pear there, sometimes even a stolen apple passed quietly from one palm to another, carried more weight than any bouquet today. A piece of fruit wasn't just a snack, it was a coded message. And yes, If you're thinking it sounds like the world's slowest, most awkward dating app, you're not wrong. One lesser-known fact is that some medieval cities actually designed love benches, public seats tucked discreetly into parks or along walls, meant for socializing but quickly repurposed for whispered conversations. Imagine city planning with romance in mind. It's oddly sweet and also slightly hilarious that while kings built cathedrals and castles, everyday people campaigned for better benches. Priorities, right? And yet, the tension between public and private was constant. Forbidden corners carried risk: a jealous husband, a watchful priest, or just an unlucky passerby with too much curiosity. But risk can be thrilling. You felt it yourself, those small rebellions, the thrill of doing something not quite allowed. In medieval times, that thrill was magnified by walls that echoed, floors that creaked, and entire households that never slept deeply because the fire had to be tended. It leaves you with an odd respect for their ingenuity. Privacy wasn't given, it was invented. A couple leaning into each other in the shadow of a stable wasn't careless. They were architects of their own small sanctuary. And maybe there's a lesson there. Intimacy doesn't depend on perfection, but on presence, the quiet bravery of carving out space in a crowded world. As you picture the lovers slipping into shadow, you might chuckle. You think about modern dating apps, about candlelit dinners, about the way people fret over the perfect playlist. Medieval lovers had none of that. Their soundtrack was the bray of donkeys, the drip of rain from a leaky roof, the shuffle of a night guard's boots, and somehow it worked. Passion always finds a corner. So here you are, listening, the modern hum of your fan blending with the imagined sounds of cobbled alleys and whispered promises. The past feels close, almost touchable. You lean back, eyes heavy, and you see those hidden courtyards where desire and secrecy lived side by side. You can almost smell the bread cooling, hear the laughter rising, and feel the rush of two hands finding each other in the dark. And as you settle deeper, you realize history isn't just kings and battles. It's also the awkward, beautiful, endlessly human search for closeness. The small rebellions against a noisy world. The timeless desire to carve out a corner, even if it's just for a moment. Your breath slows, the shadows thicken, and somewhere in the quiet, a medieval couple slips past you, giggling softly, leaving only the trace of their footsteps on the cobbles. You drift further into the world of cramped medieval homes, where privacy is as rare as a working Wi-Fi signal. At your grandma's house, the houses are small, packed, and breathing space is a kind of luxury. Imagine a single-room cottage, its thatched roof sagging, walls stitched together with wattle and daub, the scent of smoke, sweat, and stew clinging like a second skin. You think you're slipping into bed for the night, except you're not alone. You share that bed with your spouse, your children, and sometimes even your cousin or an elderly neighbor who just needed a place to crash. Romantic, isn't it? The bed itself isn't some fluffy king-size dream. It's a straw mattress stuffed with reeds, covered by a rough wool blanket, and creaking with every sigh. When you shift, the whole bed shifts. When the baby squirms, you feel it, and when the couple beside you decides to whisper sweet nothings, you hear every syllable. Those thin walls. Often they weren't even walls, more like a wooden partition, if you were lucky, or just a curtain hanging there pretending to be useful. Picture your neighbors, separated only by cloth so thin. It might as well be made of gossip. But let's not underestimate human creativity. People adapted. A glance exchanged by firelight could turn into a rendezvous under that scratchy blanket. Some waited until the rest of the household fell asleep, the snores serving as a kind of medieval white noise machine. Others, well, let's just say the line between sleeping and not sleeping was blurry, and everyone in the room knew it. Imagine lying there, eyes wide open, staring at the rafters while the couple beside you gets busy. Nothing says bonding like pretending to be asleep while your sister and her husband whisper in the dark. And here's the thing, this wasn't considered scandalous. Beds were communal. That's where stories were told, secrets exchanged, bodies warmed, and yes, intimacy attempted. The same straw mattress where children learned nursery rhymes also hosted whispered touches after a long day in the fields. The modern idea of a bedroom as a sacred, private space that simply didn't exist, a famous moment in English history, helps underline this. When King Edward II was accused by his enemies of all sorts of scandalous behavior, one of the charges wasn't that he shared a bed with men, it was that he loved the wrong people too openly. Sharing beds, even between strangers, was normal. Inns, for instance, almost always made travelers bunk together. Imagine booking a hotel room, walking in, and seeing a stranger already tucked under the blanket. That's how it worked. And if you snored, well, congratulations, you were everyone's problem. There's a small but fascinating detail many forget. Straw mattresses were often called trundle beds, and in some homes they slid under the mainframe during the day. Children or servants would crawl into these at night, right beneath the bed where their elders slept. Talk about thin boundaries. Imagine trying to whisper sweetly to your lover while knowing a set of curious ears is literally beneath your feet. Historians still debate whether this lack of privacy made intimacy more casual or more rich. Some argue couples developed silent code stitches, gestures, pauses that made the act almost ceremonial. Others insist people just didn't care, figuring everyone else was too busy with their own survival to be scandalized. The truth is, probably somewhere in between, but the uncertainty itself is a reminder that not every human experience fits neatly into the categories we like today. Now, let's bring it back to the soundscape of one of these homes. The crackle of the fire, the low breathing of bodies all around, the occasional shuffle as someone rolls over and the whole mattress groans in protest. Outside, the wind presses against the wooden slats, the rain dripping through a hole in the roof. A dog curls by the door. The night feels both heavy and alive, layered with rhythms of human closeness. You lie there, your arm pressed against another, wondering if tonight will be one of those nights when you actually get to rest, or when whispers and stifled laughter keep you awake. Here's where the comedy kicks in. Try explaining to a medieval villager that someday couples will pay extra for soundproof walls. They'd laugh in your face. Why would you want silence when the whole point of being alive was to be tangled up in other people's noise? It would be like telling them, you pay for bottled water, or for oat milk. You'd just get blank stares and maybe a polite cough. And yet, amid all this closeness, there was tenderness. People learned to make do, to adapt to conditions that feel absurd to us. They learned to carve out small bubbles of privacy, not through walls, but through trust, gestures, and timing. A shared bed wasn't just about bodies squeezed together. It was about survival, warmth, and the strange intimacy of living without barriers. In a way, the bed was the center of the home, the anchor of life, holding the contradictions of comfort, frustration, and desire all at once. So as you imagine yourself under that rough wool blanket, with someone's elbow poking your ribs and a child kicking in their sleep, let your mind settle into that rhythm. It's chaotic, it's noisy, but it's also oddly comforting. There's a philosophy hidden in it. Privacy is nice, sure, but connection is what kept people alive. You might not get a quiet night, but you got the reassurance of knowing you weren't alone, and maybe, just maybe, that's worth more than silence. The air shifts again, this time carrying steam instead of straw dust. You find yourself stepping into a medieval bathhouse, and suddenly everything feels both public and oddly intimate. Forget the idea of a spa where you sip cucumber water in serene silence. These places were loud, lively, and frankly a little chaotic. Buckets sloshed, voices echoed, and every surface glistened with dampness. The smell, a cocktail of herbs, soap, sweat, and wood smoke. You wrinkle your nose, but then again, it beats the smell of week-old wool and pigs right outside the door. Picture the space, wooden tubs lined against the wall, some large enough for 2 or 3 boaties to squeeze inside. Hot water bubbling after being hauled from cauldrons over open fires. Candles flicker, steam coils around the beams overhead, and voices drop to whispers that carry farther than people realize. You dip a toe in and wince it's hotter than you expected, but after days of mud and sweat, you sink in anyway. That water hugs your skin, heavy and mineral-rich, while people around you laugh, flirt, and sometimes barter. Yes, barter. Bathhouses weren't just for washing off grime. They were social arenas, the medieval version of your favorite cafe, gym, and gossip hub rolled into one. Business deals were struck over steaming tubs. Confessions slipped out between rinses, and, let's be honest, plenty of cheeky glances were exchanged. Nothing sparks romance like scrubbing someone's back while 6 other people pretend not to notice. A well-known example comes from Paris in the 14th century, when city officials tried to regulate bathhouses because they were getting a reputation. Not because people disliked bathing, but because bathhouses were becoming a little too fun. Couples would sneak away to the smaller chambers, and suddenly, the line between cleaning up and dirty business blurred dramatically. Authorities, posted rules about proper conduct. But we all know how effective rules are when people are already half naked. Here's the fun detail most people miss. Bathhouses often had food service. Imagine sitting in hot water while a servant brings you roasted chicken, wine, or spiced bread. That's right, dinner and a soak, medieval style. You can almost hear the crunch of crust as someone chews beside you, splashing a little grease into the bathwater. Not exactly sanitary by modern standards, but try telling them that. In fact, some records show people brought dice games into the baths, turning the whole place into a floating tavern. Of course, the reputation of bath shifted over time. In early medieval Europe, they were family-friendly, open to men and women alike, and considered wholesome. But by the late Middle Ages, they got tangled up with moral panic. Historians still debate whether bathhouses were primarily centers of hygiene or hubs of vice. Some argue they remained crucial for cleanliness in crowded cities. Others insist they drifted into the territory of brothels, where taking a bath meant anything but. The truth is probably, once again, messy people came to bathe, to socialize, and sometimes for much more. You lean back, letting the heat seep into your bones, listening to the soft splash of water, the laughter echoing off the wooden walls, and the occasional whispered exchange that makes everyone else raise an eyebrow. A couple across the tub leans too close, their knees bumping beneath the waterline. You try not to stare, but in this space, staring is almost unavoidable. Privacy doesn't live here. Everything happens in plain sight, wrapped in steam but never truly hidden. There's humor in it too. Imagine explaining to a medieval bather that in the future, people will pay money for private hot tubs with jets of bubbling water, only to sit there alone, staring at their phone. They'd laugh and say, "What's the point of hot water if you're not whispering into someone's ear or making a deal over bread and wine?" Honestly, they might have a point, but the bathhouse wasn't all fun and games. Authorities sometimes shut them down entirely, especially during outbreaks of plague, believing heat and steam might spread disease faster. And yet, people kept returning as soon as they reopened. The law of warmth, touch, and conversation outweighed the risk. When the streets were cold, filthy, and full of rats, a steamy bathhouse felt like paradise heaven. If it was paradise, you had to share with a dozen strangers. You notice the flickering lamplight softening faces around you. Men lean in closer, women giggle behind hands, and steam curls between bodies like a veil, half concealing, half revealing. It's not glamorous, not private, but somehow it's thrilling. For every awkward splash, every too loud laugh, there's also that little hum of excitement, that possibility of connection. And maybe that's the charm. Not the bathing itself, but the closeness, the unpolished humanity of being together in such a raw, exposed way. So here you are, half floating in the warm water, ears buzzing with the chorus of whispers, dice clattering, and spoons scraping bowls. You know this isn't a spa, and it's certainly not a quiet retreat. But in a world where cold, dirt, and loneliness loom just outside the door, this place feels like a sanctuary. A slippery, noisy, slightly scandalous sanctuary, but still a sanctuary. The steam of the bathhouse dissolves, and you find yourself in the open air, where the fields stretch wide and the sky yawns endlessly overhead. The smell is different here, earthy, sweet, touched by wood smoke from the bonfires already crackling in the distance. It isn't just a field anymore. Tonight, it's a festival, and everything feels louder, brighter, and far more tempting than it has any right to be. You hear the pipes first, thin flutes trilling in uneven bursts, followed by the steady thud of drums that make the ground quiver beneath your boots. Laughter weaves itself into the music, and you catch sight of dancers circling the maypole, ribbons spiraling upward like vines climbing a tree. The colors are too vivid for such a muddy field, reds and blues shimmering under torchlight, skirts swishing through the muck as though mud was silk. Someone shouts near a stall, hawking honey cakes, while a roasted goose spins lazily on a spit. The scent drifts through the crowd, warm and greasy, mixing with ale, foam, and sweat. It shouldn't be pleasant, but somehow it is. It smells like freedom, and freedom is what people came for. When your village is small enough that you know every cough, every gossip, every crooked smile, the festival feels like the world cracking open. Strangers appear, pilgrims, merchants, even wandering minstrels who smell faintly of horse and rosewater. For a few nights a year, the village feels huge, and so do your chances. A glance across the fire, a brush of a sleeve in the press of the crowd, a whisper half lost in the drumming. Desire doesn't hide here. It runs loose in the trampled grass. You hear the old songs about May Day, about slipping into the woods when the bonfire burns brightest. Couples vanish behind hedges and return hours later, flushed, laughing, their excuses flimsy at best. Priests grumbled endlessly about indecent frolicking in their records, but parchment can't compete with hormones. You almost feel sorry for them, scribbling in candlelight, while outside the night is alive with music and whispers. What makes you smile, though, is learning that festivals, sometimes staged mock marriages, two people could stand before their friends, crown each other with flowers, and declare themselves joined until dawn. No paperwork, no priest, no inheritance, just a playful union that gave cover for a night together. In the morning, the vows dissolved like dew, and life snapped back into its ordinary rhythm. Call it medieval speed dating, but with more ale and far fewer lawyers. The field itself becomes a character in this story. You step over the ruts where carts once dragged in barley, now transformed into dance floors. Torches glow along the hedge, shadows sliding like secret dancers themselves. Children chase each other between the stalls, their shrieks mingling with the bawdy jokes of men already deep in their cups. And somewhere, tucked behind a tent, you catch the muffled sound of giggling two people thinking they've found privacy, when all they've really found is a thin canvas wall. It's easy to forget that festivals had a rhythm deeper than revelry. They marked the seasons, the turning of survival into abundance, the rare chance to breathe after months of work. And maybe that's why they pulsed with desire. When life is uncertain, when winters bite hard, when you never know what plague or tax might arrive, a night of dancing and closeness feels like defiance. Some scholars suggest communities tolerated the wildness as a kind of safety valve, a sanctioned moment for release. Others argue that authority looked away simply because joy, like fire, spreads too quickly to stamp out. Both may be true, but when you're standing here in the glow of torchlight, it hardly matters. The music is too loud to leave room for doubt. A jug of ale is pressed into your hand, the rim sticky, froth stinging your lip. You sip, and it burns warm down your throat, loosening the heaviness of the day. A girl in a blue kirtle spins past, her braid whipping your arm, and the boy chasing her trips in the mud, sending laughter rippling through the circle of dancers. Everyone is too busy smiling to care about dignity. Then comes that moment, the one you didn't expect. But festivals always deliver. A stranger meets your gaze. It lingers just a beat too long, says something wordless but heavy. You feel that feel tilt, not in danger, but in possibility. The bonfire pops, sending sparks into the black sky, and suddenly the music and laughter are background noise to the thrum in your chest. The whole scene, ridiculous and messy, is also a stage. Every stumble, every splash of ale, every half-sung ballad is an invitation. There's humor in realizing how little has changed. Today, people swipe through faces on glowing screens, searching for connection. Back then, you just wandered into a muddy field, surrounded by pigs and pastry crumbs, and somehow it worked. Romance didn't need curated photos or clever bios. It needed a torch, a tune, and the smell of roasting goose to set the mood. Maybe less elegant, but certainly more honest. And so you stand in this festival, the field alive around you, the mud thick underfoot, your heart beating in rhythm with the drum. The festival is messy, noisy, even a little scandalous, but it offers something rare, the freedom to forget tomorrow. The crops can wait, the debts can wait, even the priest's scowl can wait. Tonight, the field belongs to fire, to music, and to the sudden spark between two people finding each other in the glow. The embers of the festival still glow in your mind. As you walk away from the last knots of laughter, torches, gutter, ribbons are trampled into the mud, and the music that once made your chest vibrate now recedes like a tide, leaving behind a trail of breath and small, furtive footsteps. Couples peel off from the crowd with sticky hands and guilty grins, slipping down lanes that lead away from the open field into places that feel quieter simply because the world has turned its face. You follow them not because you are nosy, though perhaps you are, but because there is a kind of human curiosity that wants to see how the night finishes its story. You drift with them until the noise thins and the smell of roasting meat fades, replaced by the cool, clean scent of damp stone and candle smoke. Here the village narrows into a lane where walls press close, and on one side a low iron gate creaks as someone draws it. Beyond the gate, the churchyard opens like a secret room. In daylight, it hosts markets and gossip and children's rough play. But at night, it becomes a different kind of stage, shadowed, solemn, and oddly permissive. The very stones that mark grief make surprisingly good backrests for whispered confessions. A hush settles that is not quite silence. It is the special hush of places that know how to keep secrets. Moonlight slips through carved crosses and paints the ground in slow, cool stripes. Two figures slip into the lee of a tomb, shoulders pressed close enough to feel the warmth through. Rough wool. You can see the breath fog between them in the cold, feel the small hush of linen, and hear the soft exchange that sounds almost like prayer. Prayer could blush. Around you, angels in stone look down with a firmness that would be funny if the moment weren't so human. There is something quietly comic about swearing a private oath beneath the watchful eyes of saints who have been politely ignoring so many similar scenes for centuries. You imagine the priest who will later mutter about propriety. He might have spent the day blessing ale and marriages, then gone to his warm meal, wondering why his own sermons seem to have the same effect as a lullaby, soothing on the surface, ineffective underneath. The monastic cloister, all echo and order and candlelit copyists bent over manuscripts, seems like the last place where desire would find a foothold, yet the quieter the space, the louder small longings sing. A novice glances too often at a pilgrim's sun-tanned hand. A nun tucks a shoot of rosemary into the fold of her habit and feels the ridiculous, tender shame of it. Those small acts are not grand rebellions. They are the soft, persistent ways humans insist on being alive. You might think this sounds like scandalmongering, and many moralists loved to turn these little lives into cautionary tales. Records were kept fragments of council, decrees, and parish notes that wagged a stern finger at misuses of consecrated ground. Fines were sometimes levied, the kind that would sting more in reputation than in coin. Yet even these records, written in careful hand, betray a kind of resignation. People kept doing the same things. The law's ink could not quite keep up with the persistence of a hand, reaching for another in the dark. Historians still debate how widespread such nocturnal romances truly were. Some see piles of moral treatises and imagine a world awash in vice, while others read the same pages and hear community eyes winking and forgiving more often than condemning. You don't need to choose a side to understand the point. Thresholds pull at us. A churchyard sits exactly between life and death, duty and abandon. It is the perfect place for heartbeats that want to be both small and big at once. There is tenderness here too. The cool stone under a cheek, the soft press of a palm on an arm that smells faintly of wood smoke, the small, concrete comforts that people steal for themselves. You notice a pair who have left a scrap of ribbon tied around a weathered cross, a token left as proof that they were here. It's not dramatic, it's practical. Tokens keep promises in a world where words can be swept away by mourning obligations. A ribbon can be a lifeline, a memory you can hold to on a wet, miserable day. Sometimes the sanctity of the place sharpens the moment rather than dampening it. To love, where life and death sit so close, is to be reminded of how brief everything is. The chapel bells may be ringing for a late hour vigil, and that sound threads through the hush like a metronome. It grounds you, reminds you that whatever secret warmth you've stolen will cool with the dawn. That urgency gives gestures a kind of holiness of their own, odd as that sounds. Perhaps the church's own reminders of vanities of the brittle nature of life made people more willing to seize the small brightness of now. You can almost see the scene from both sides at once. A couple laughing too loud and trying to pass it off as merriment, a monk muttering a prayer that doubles as a warning, a child who sleeps through everything because childhood is blessedly impermeable. The mix of solemnity and silliness makes everything feel true. The sacred and the profane braid together until it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. And maybe that's the quiet lesson of this night, that life refuses tidy categories. As the chill deepens, the lovers exchange the smallest of gifts, something pocket-sized and earthy, a quarter of an apple, a sprig of rosemary, a ribbon stolen from a dancer's hair. These are not dramatic tokens, but practical ones, things that smell like the field, like the maypole, like the hands that reached across the crowd. They are compact proof that the festival's spark traveled with them, that the night did not simply end when the last drum beat dies. You feel the cleverness of it. If walls are thin and time is shared, then symbols must be small, portable, and discreet. You step back from the stone and listen. Somewhere a gate squeaks shut. Somewhere else a laugh ripples and dies. The night will carry on, and the world will reclaim the space with roosters and market calls. But for this breath, for these heartbeats that have stolen a place beneath carved angels, something private and vivid has been woven out of the public noise. It might be improvised, awkward, and a little silly, and that is precisely why it endures. The festival moves on, but its echoes have tucked themselves into the stones, into the ribbons, into the secret places people return to again and again. You let your shoulders drop. The cold stone presses comfortingly against your back. The bell tolls once, a soft punctuation to a night that refuses to be simply one thing. You walk away with the knowledge that even when the world demands decorum, people will find small, clever paths to being seen, held, and known. The shadows keep the secret for a little while longer, and you carry the warm, foolish feeling with you as you move on into the quiet that follows. You can almost hear the bells still echoing, can't you? That strange mingling of piety and passion, lingering at the edge of the churchyard, where a stolen look felt both dangerous and delicious. And yet, because humans are clever creatures, you notice that the desire doesn't stop at stolen glances. It spills outward into daily life, into gestures so small you'd miss them if you weren't paying attention. Imagine it, a pair of hands brushing in the market, and instead of words, a piece of fruit is slipped into your palm. Not just any fruit, of course. Apples and pears, those plump little messengers, spoke louder than most confessions. You'd think it was just a snack, but know the crunch of sweetness, whispered of longing, of fertility, of a very unsubtle suggestion that two bodies might one day share more than a piece of fruit. Historians still debate whether the meaning was always understood by everyone, or if sometimes you just ended up with a pair because the seller had too many. Awkward, really. When you're convinced you're holding a love letter, but it turns out to be someone's leftover produce. And flowers, oh, don't get me started. In a world without emojis, a blossom was basically your medieval wink. A rose tucked beneath the laces of a bodice, a sprig of rosemary slipped into a sleeve. People swore rosemary meant fidelity, which is terribly ironic, considering how many times it was offered in secrecy behind someone else's back. But that's the charm, isn't it? The symbols allowed lovers to talk while never saying a word, their messages hidden in petals, stems, and the occasional conveniently ripe peach. Of course, the church wasn't thrilled about this silent language of desire, too much temptation in too small a package. Some sermons even warned that flowers could incite lust, as if a daisy was just waiting to lead you astray. You picture the preacher, red-faced and wagging a finger, while half the congregation is already smuggling roses under their cloaks. People listened, nodded solemnly, and then went right back to using violets as coded invitations. Human nature has a stubborn sense of humor that even the pulpit couldn't entirely erase. Picture a festival day in spring, fields buzzing with music and someone weaving garlands of blossoms, placing one crown just a bit too gently onto another's head. It's playful, innocent on the surface, but beneath it hums the same current you felt in the graveyard shadows. These gifts were portable confessions, each one carrying a little spark of risk. After all, if someone else noticed, say, your parents, or worse, your spouse, the sweet little apple could turn sour very quickly. And here's the philosophical bit. Whispered between yawns, intimacy often grows not from grand declarations, but from these tiny exchanges. The fruit, the flower, the carved trinket each was a reminder that desire thrives in symbols, that humans are endlessly creative at disguising what they most want. It wasn't just romance, it was survival. To crave was human, but to hide that craving in plain sight, that was genius. So when you hold an apple in your hand today, or find a flower left on your doorstep, you're touching something ancient, a little whisper across centuries, reminding you that secrecy and longing are old friends, and that the line between innocent gesture and smoldering suggestion has always been deliciously thin. And just like that, the story drifts from fields of blossoms into the darker, stranger corners of medieval thought, where doctors and philosophers insisted your health depended on the heat of your desires. But that's for later. Let's savor the apple a little longer, while its sweetness lingers on your tongue. Quiet as a kiss you're not supposed to share, you still feel the weight of that apple, warm from another's palm, as if it were more than fruit, a prescription. In the medieval mind, almost everything you desired, ate, or touched was bound to the mysterious balance of humors sloshing inside your body. Too much heat, too much cold, too much moisture, and suddenly your long night of passion was not only sinful, but also a medical emergency. Convenient, isn't it? One kiss and you've risked both your soul and your spleen. Imagine the apothecary's stall, crowded with jars of dried roots, powders, and herbs that smell somewhere between bitter tea and shoe leather. Behind the counter, a man with ink's fingers shakes his head gravely as he hands over fennel seeds. Not for cooking, no. These are to cool your blood should your desires run a little too fiery. The advice comes with a sideways glance, a half smirk that makes you wonder if he, too, believes it or simply enjoys selling licorice at twice the price. You see, sex was not simply about pleasure or even sin. It was biology, health, balance. Doctors wrote in solemn Latin that intimacy could purge excess humors, almost like bloodletting, but more fun. But only in moderation. Too much could drain your vital spirits, leaving you weak, pale, and likely to trip over a pig in the street the next morning. Historians still debate whether this warning was genuine concern or a clever way to control behavior by wrapping it in medical jargon. Either way, it's the kind of prescription no modern pharmacy would dare scribble on a pad. The irony is delicious. While priests thundered about lust pulling you toward hellfire, physicians calmly suggested that a measured embrace might actually keep you healthy. One promised damnation, the other digestion, and people somehow held both in their heads at once, nodding wisely to both sides, then slipping back under thin wool blankets with someone who smelled faintly of onions and wood smoke. Picture the bedroom of a merchant's house, shutters drawn against the damp air. A wife, cheeks flushed from childbirth months before, whispers that the midwife insisted on certain herbs, not only to heal, but to restore balance between desire and duty. The husband, nervous but eager, mutters about cooling foods. Figs perhaps, before leaning closer anyway. Their intimacy is tangled not only in love, but in a messy web of advice from priest, doctor, and neighbor alike. One can almost hear the creak of the bed frame debating the matter as loudly as any philosopher. A lesser-known truth is that some physicians even recommended specific positions for health. Yes, you heard right, not for pleasure, mind you, but for the likelihood of conception or to protect a woman's supposed delicate organs. These instructions were whispered in Latin manuals, disguised as science, while husbands awkwardly tried to translate them into practice. Imagine explaining to your wife, in candlelight, that the doctor says lying slightly to the left will improve both fertility and digestion. You can almost hear her laughter echo through the rafters. Of course, there were always contradictions. One doctor swore that too much desire dried the body like overbaked bread. Another declared it moistened everything dangerously. A third insisted the moon had more to do with your urges than anything you ate. The contradictions themselves became part of daily life. Knowledge was less a set of rules and more a shifting tide, leaving ordinary people guessing which way to lean. Perhaps that's why superstition slid so easily into medicine, and medicine back into superstition. Like dancers swapping partners, humor often sprouted in the cracks. A young man caught yawning in the tavern might be teased for having lost to many spirits the night before, while an older neighbor smirked knowingly. And if you sneezed, someone might mutter that clearly your humors were too stirred, and perhaps you'd better cool yourself with a cold bath or less exciting company. These were not jokes told loudly, but softly, with the sly grin of people who lived in crowded houses and still somehow found privacy enough to share them. Asterisk. You might be tempted to think of all this as ignorance, and yes, there is comedy in picturing a doctor prescribing lettuce leaves to tame lust. But if you listen softly enough, there's also a kind of philosophy here, that the body, mind, and desire are woven together, not separate machines. That intimacy can wound, but also heal. That what we hunger for is not just sin to be punished, nor just indulgence to be enjoyed, but something threaded into our health, our balance, our very breath. And isn't that thought strangely modern? We, too, look for meaning in the connection between passion and well-being. We just package it differently. Magazines, podcasts, wellness gurus, replacing apothecaries with neat jars of supplements. You can almost see the parallel shelves, separated by centuries, both promising to fix your appetite with herbs and advice. And still, neither can explain why desire sometimes flares in the quietest moment, uninvited, unstoppable. So you stand again in that market, a bundle of herbs in one hand, an apple in the other. The smells are sharp, earthy, oddly comforting. The chatter of healers, priests, neighbors, all trying to tell you how to live, how to love, how to balance. And yet, in the end, the decision slips back into your own skin, your own heartbeat. The knowledge is part wisdom, part superstition, part joke, and perhaps that messy mix is exactly what made it endure. Breathe in deeply. The air is thick with incense, fennel, onions, and the faint rustle of parchment where advice waits to be ignored. Breathe out slowly. The humors may be unbalanced, but the story continues, sliding toward the next murky corner of intimacy, where rules turn into punishments and secrets whisper under torchlight. The herbs in your hand fade into memory, their scent dissolving as the sound of footsteps takes over boots on stone, the measured rhythm of authority. Desire was never only about bodies or balance. It was also about rules, and the men who scribbled them into parchment by candlelight, eager to decide what strangers could do under their blankets. You picture the council chamber, cold even in summer. Walls lined with carved wood, a clerk scratching furiously with quill, while a magistrate drones about moral order. Somewhere in the back, someone coughs, someone else yawns. And yet these words, these yawns, become law. Law that could fine you for holding hands in the wrong place, or drag you into court if your passions slipped too openly into the streets. It's like writing speed limits on feelings, as if hearts will obey the traffic signs. Common folk knew. The risks: whisper too loudly in a bathhouse, linger too long in a dark corner, and suddenly you weren't just indulging desire, you were breaking statute. The punishments ranged from fines to public shame. Imagine your neighbors gathered in the square, not to hear gossip, but to watch it carved into your dignity. Stocks, whippings, the threat of exile. The law wanted not only to punish, but to display, to turn your private moment into everyone else's lesson. Nothing says romantic mood like being chained up with turnips thrown at your head. And yet, as always, reality bent the rules. Laws looked tidy on parchment, but life was messy. Lovers found ways to slip through alleys, bribe guards, or simply rely on the fact that no official could be everywhere at once. After all, magistrates had their own secrets. The irony, right? Itself, a man thundering about virtue by day, then knocking softly at a widow's door by night. Historians still debate whether these contradictions were hypocrisy or simply survival, because in a world so full of restrictions, bending them became its own kind of craft. Picture a young couple in a village, summoned before the manor court because someone claimed to hear giggles behind the barn. The lord, bored with these endless hearings, waves a hand, mutters about fines, and collects a chicken as payment. The lovers blush, the neighbors smirk, and life continues. The law pretended to draw a hard line, but in practice it often dissolved into negotiation, bribes, or simple exhaustion. Who has the energy to prosecute every kiss when the harvest is late and the pigs are running loose? Still, some rules carried real weight. Adultery, for example, could strip you of property or worse. In some towns, women were paraded in shame, hair cut, clothes torn, made into walking warnings. Husbands caught in the act might face fines, though somehow the scales of justice tilted strangely lighter in their favor. You notice the pattern. Laws about desire always claimed to be about morality, but more often they protected property, inheritance, and reputation. Love was dangerous not because it burned hot, but because it threatened the tidy boxes of wealth and lineage. Step into a monastery cloister, quiet except for the wind sliding over stone. Even here, rules about intimacy filled the air. Priests, sworn to celibacy, monks to silence, nuns to enclosure. The idea was to erase desire entirely. Yet human nature rarely obeys erasers. Courts heard of priests with secret families, abbots with suspiciously close students, nuns exchanging letters, far too sweet for spiritual friendship. The punishments could be harsh, but the whispers kept flowing. And maybe that's the secret. Rules were loud, punishments louder, but desire whispered on, soft, patient, undefeated. And isn't that, in a way, the comedy of it all? 1,000 laws, ink on parchment, trying to stop a glance, a smile, a heartbeat. It's like trying to legislate the weather. One moment of rain, and suddenly all those rules dissolve into mud. Ordinary people knew this. They rolled their eyes, paid their fines, whispered their jokes. A man might grin at a friend in the tavern, careful. Drink too much ale and you'll marry the brewer's daughter by accident. And the whole room would laugh, not because it was true, but because it so easily could be. A lesser-known fact. In some towns, there were even specific times and places where intimacy was allowed, or at least overlooked. Festivals, harvest nights, the margins of law. Officials who could not stop it sometimes pretended not to see, a kind of unofficial truce. It shows again how medieval law was less about stopping desire and more about controlling where, when, and with whom it unfolded. So you walk through the market square, hearing the crack of a judge's gavel echo faintly from the Guildhall. And yet you see lovers slip between stools, their hands brushing over apples, their eyes saying far more than the law could write. The rules hang heavy, but the air is thicker with laughter. Risk the thrill of being almost caught. It is not obedience that shapes the night, but creativity. Breathe in the damp stone of the courthouse, the dry parchment smell of law. Breathe out the sweeter scent of roasted meat from a tavern nearby, where lovers lean too close and laugh too softly, knowing full well the law is both watching and looking away. The balance tips always between punishment and possibility. And as you listen, the story leans toward the secret shelves, where manuals and whispered advice try to guide what the law could not contain. The courthouse doors close behind you like a book shut on a loud argument, and your hand still smells faintly of ink and roast pork. You wander toward a quieter light, someone's window, where a candle gutters, and there, on a low shelf or tucked beneath a mattress, you find the little things people pass hand to hand. Slim, dog-eared booklets, folded notes, a scrap of paper with a pressed flower. They are not law, they are remedy. Where parchment once sentenced, these pages whisper. You open one and the leather breathes, warm and soft. The script inside pretends to be propriety, manners, courtly behavior, the polite pose of a well-raised person, but if you look closely, the sentences sway. They teach you how to make your veil catch the breeze, how to drop a word like a pebble so someone will bend to pick it up, how to leave a ribbon where the dawn will find it and smile. The advice reads like a lover's map disguised in etiquette. Small acts that translate to large confessions. The margins hold little jokes, an inked heart here, a crude sketch there. as if the writer could not resist winking at future readers. In the quiet of a candlelit room, you watch a young woman trace a line of advice with her finger. She tries the recommended tilt of the head before the mirror, practicing a glance as though it were a line in a play. It is both ridiculous and terribly serious. You see her laugh softly at herself, the sound barely moving the air, and you understand the odd comfort these books offered. They taught people how to risk, step by careful step. In a world of thin walls and watchful neighbors, a practiced glance could be as daring as a stolen kiss. Sometimes the manuals are earnest, pages compiled by well-meaning matrons or pragmatic midwives, offering ways to keep a household intact. Other times, they are mischief, margins filled with jokes, recipes for spiced wine said to warm the blood and, incidentally, the affections. A recipe might list rosemary and honey with the same tone used for mending a hem. You sense the blend of medicine and flirtation. Folks borrowed a pinch of apothecary and a pinch of audacity, and stirred them together in a cup. There are oddities here that make you smile. A university scholar folds rhetoric and desire into the same lecture, using examples from love to teach persuasion. The students laugh. Later, they rehearse those persuasive flourishes in taverns. A cleric who preaches restraint by day writes carefully about how a woman's veils fall gracefully and in the same breath warns of the dangers of too much proximity. The line between admonition and instruction is so thin it keeps folding in on itself. Historians still debate whether these manuals recorded how people truly behaved or whether they are polite fantasized blueprints for a romance people wished they could perform. Perhaps both are true, wish and action braided together like two hands. The secrecy around these books is part of their charm. Lovers fold pages into letters and hide them beneath quilts, press petals between them, or write in a cipher only a friend can read. The city has its codes. A certain fold of a handkerchief means meet me by the mill. A speck of ash on a doorstep says, I passed here last night. It is ingenious, this tiny language of signs. You almost admire the cleverness. People who cannot shout their wants find ways to hum them. Some manuals are practical in ways that make you nod. Advice for courting in a crowded household includes tips on timing after the children are asleep but before the fire cools. Other notes address the aftermath, how to soothe a jealous neighbor, how to explain a too long absence with a borrowed excuse, how to tuck a token where it won't be discovered by prying hands. The books teach the art of returning to daily life without leaving a trace. They are less about grand gestures and more about the quiet maintenance of desire in the margins of every day. Obligations. You run a finger along a faded page that recommends humility and laughter in equal measure. It suggests poetry, but not too much, and certainly never in front of the wrong in-laws. The tone is remarkably modern in its plainness. It acknowledges awkwardness, forgives fumbling, and makes room for the clumsy human heart. That honesty is disarming. It says simply, you are not the first to stumble, and you will not be the last. There are moments when the manuals become practical manuals, indeed lists of herbs to steep in wine for feverish nights, charms to tuck into pillows, small incantations that are part medicine, part superstition. A midwife's notebook might sit next to a lover's note. In the same hand, instructions on easing childbirth brush up against directions for a clandestine meeting. The overlap is not scandalous so much as sensible. People who know how to keep life moving also know how to keep love alive. You watch a pair of friends exchange a folded note behind a barrel in the market. their shoulders brushing as one pretends to haggle, while the other pretends not to notice. The note slips to a palm, then to a pocket. Later, under the cover of a dark lane, it blossoms into conversation. The manual did its work. A gesture practiced and perfected, a language learned without speeches. There's humor in it too, see. People acting out instructions with the awkwardness of improvisation, but the result is real, and sometimes better for its slight clumsiness. What the manuals teach, beneath the coy rules and the herbal recipes, is a kind of tolerance. They acknowledge constraint and teach ways around it that are not always rebellious, but often ingenious. They contain a philosophy of small resistances. A ribbon left on a post, a word dropped at a market, a glance held a beat longer. In an age of law and sermon, these tiny rebellions were humane. They did not overthrow the world. They made living with it easier. You close the booklet with care. The leather size shut. Outside, the night deepens. Lamps gutter, and a dog barks once in the distance. The sound wraps around you like a blanket. The manuals are quiet now, their pages settled, but their lessons linger in the way people carry themselves as they move into the dark. They teach timing, tact, and the gentle art of being seen without being seized. As you tuck the book away, the hush of the street swells. The law sleeps in its hall, the gavel laid aside, the hearth embers glow, yet the night is far from empty. It offers a different kind of instruction. Silence, shadow, the undercurrent of breath that turns the city into a place where secrets keep company. You feel the story edging toward that hush, toward the soft architecture of dark and silence that shapes every stolen word and every held hand. Night drapes itself across the town like a velvet curtain, muting the noise of stalls and sermons, cooling the breath of cobbled stones still warm from the day. You step into it slowly, the way you'd lower yourself into deep water. Everything is gentler. Here no merchants shouting, no priests wagging fingers, no children chasing each other with sticks. Only the hush of your own footsteps, softened by the dark. The houses pulled their shutters close, but not so tight that light cannot leak through the cracks. A flicker here, a glow there, small, as fireflies caught in wooden boxes. You imagine the lives inside, someone bending close to a lover with a finger to their lips, someone pressing a whispered promise into the hollow of a neck. These walls are thin, but the silence is thick, almost protective. The night does not. Erase desire, it muffles it, gives it a softer room in which to breathe. You pass by a garden where the late roses have curled in on themselves. Their scent lingers, damp and a little melancholy, like the memory of something just out of reach. A couple leans against the low wall, not kissing, not touching, only standing close enough that their shadows blend into one. The restraint is almost comic. You want to say, oh, just hold hands already, but there's beauty in their patience. They trust the dark to do half the work, and then there are dreams. You know that sleep is not an end, but another kind of stage where minds rehearse what daylight won't allow. A baker who sells bread by day finds himself needing something else in his sleep, cheeks flushed in ways flour cannot explain. A girl who never dared lift her eyes at church walks through endless corridors in her dream, her hand brushing one she pretends not to recognize. Even in rest, the body does not keep still. Historians still debate whether medieval dream books reflected true belief in omens or were simply excuses to discuss what could not be spoken aloud. Either way, the result is the same. Desire travels. by night disguised as vision, yet perfectly understood by those who wake with flushed cheeks. The silence itself has a language, the creak of a stair in a house where everyone else should be asleep, the pause of a candle flame as someone shields it with their hand, the faintest scrape of a shoe across stone. You learn to listen differently, to tune your ear to the hush between sounds. It is in those spaces that secrets live fragile, yes, but also strong enough to carry whole lives forward. There is humor here too, because not every night is as graceful as lovers imagine. A snore rattles through half a street, ruining someone's attempt at a whispered vow. A neighbor, suspicious of the odd bump against her wall, throws a bucket of water out the window without looking. Two young men slip into the wrong courtyard entirely and must pretend they're searching for a lost chicken. The dark forgives, but it also plays tricks, and people laugh about it later, which is its own kind of tenderness, the philosophy hidden. In all this is simple. Silence is not emptiness, and darkness is not absence. They are containers. They hold what cannot be displayed. They give shelter to what cannot survive glare. Every age finds ways to carve out such shelters. For medieval folk, the night was not merely a span to be endured between labours, it was the one time the world loosened its grip. You walk a little further, past the fields now emptied of festivals, past the sanctuaries that trembled between piety and passion, past the tokens exchanged and the manuals hidden under beds. All of it has led here, to this hour where sound thins and breath slows. The city exhales, and so do you. Now the script itself shifts. You are invited to do the same. Inhale slowly, as though the night air could fill every tired corner of you. Hold it gently, then let it go, soft as a candle sighing out. Again inhale, notice your shoulders rise, then release, feel them sink. The cobbles fade, the shutters blur, the roses close. The lovers melt into shadow, the laughter trails off into memory. Everything narrows now into the rhythm of your breathing. A hush spreads, not of fear, but of comfort. You are part of the same silence that once sheltered secret notes, dream visions, and midnight footsteps. You are in company, even alone, and so the night folds you in. You drift, as if following a procession of lanterns that vanish one by one, until only the dark remains, warm and unthreatening. You let go of the stories, the sounds, even the breath that carried you through. What remains is rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.